This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Sky Island by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 6. The Six Snub-Nosed Princesses. The Boolaroo was laughing and dancing around in front of them as if well pleased. For a moment the prisoners could not imagine what had happened to them, but presently half a dozen Blueskins, resembling in shape and costume their ruler, but less magnificently dressed, stepped in front of them and bowed low to the Boolaroo. "Your orders, most mighty, flighty, tight and righty monarch, have been obeyed," said the leader. "Very well, Captain. Take that umbrella and carry it to my royal treasury. See that it is safely locked up. Here's the key, and if you don't return it to me within 5 minutes, I'll have you patched." The Captain took the key and the Magic Umbrella and hastened away to the palace. Button-Bright had already hooked the ropes to the elephant trunk handle, so when the Captain carried away the umbrella, he dragged after him first the double seat, then Cap'n Bill's seat, which was fastened to it, and finally the lunch basket, which was attached to the lower seat. At every few steps some of these would trip up the Captain and cause him to take a tumble, but as he had only 5 minutes' time in which to perform his errand, he would scramble to his feet again and dash along the path until a board or the basket tripped him again. They all watched him with interest until he had disappeared within the palace, when the King turned to his men and said: "Release the prisoners. They are now quite safe and cannot escape me." So the men unwound the long cords that were twined around the bodies of our three friends and set them free. These men seemed to be soldiers, although they bore no arms except the cords. Each cord had a weight at the end, and when the weight was skillfully thrown by a soldier, it wound the cord around anything in the twinkling of an eye, and held fast until it was unwound again. Trot decided these Blueskins must have stolen into the garden when summoned by the bells the Boolaroo had rung, but they had kept out of sight and crept up behind the bench on which our friends were seated until a signal from the King aroused them to action. The little girl was greatly surprised by the suddenness of her capture, and so was Button-Bright. Cap'n Bill shook his head and said he was afeared they'd get into trouble. "Our mistake," he added, "was in stopping to eat our lunch. But it's too late now to cry over spilt milk." "I don't mind. Not much, anyhow," asserted Trot bravely. "We're in no hurry to get back, are we, Button-Bright?" "I'm not," said the boy. "If they hadn't taken the umbrella, I wouldn't care how long we stopped in this funny island. Do you think it's a fairy country, Trot?" "Can't say, I'm sure," she answered. "I haven't seen anything here yet that reminds me of fairies, but Cap'n Bill said a floating island in the sky was sure to be a fairyland." "I think so yet, mate," returned the sailor. "But there's all sorts of fairies, I've heard. Some is good and some is bad. And if all the Blueskins are like their Boolaroo, they can't be called first class." "Don't let me hear any more impudence, prisoners!" called the Boolaroo, sternly. "You are already condemned to severe punishment, and if I have any further trouble with you, you are liable to be patched." "What's being patched?" inquired the girl. The soldiers all laughed at this question, but the King did not reply. Just then a door in the palace opened, and out trooped a group of girls. There were 6 of them, all gorgeously dressed in silken gowns with many puffs and tucks and ruffles and flounces and laces and ribbons, everything being in some shade of blue, grading from light blue to deep blue. Their blue hair was elaborately dressed and came to a point at the top of their heads. The girls approached in a line along the garden path, all walking with mincing steps and holding their chins high. Their skirts prevented their long legs from appearing as grotesque as did those of the men, but their necks were so thin and long that the ruffles around them only made them seem the more absurd. "Ah," said the King with a frown, "here come the 6 snub-nosed princesses, the most beautiful and aristocratic ladies in Sky Island." "They're snub-nosed, all right," observed Trot, looking at the girls with much interest. but I should think it would make 'em mad to call him that." "Why?" asked the Boolooroo in surprise. "Is not a snub-nose the highest mark of female beauty?" "Is it?" asked the girl. "Most certainly. In this favored island, which is the center of the universe, a snub-nose is an evidence of high breeding which any lady would be proud to possess." The six snub-nosed princesses now approached the fountain and stood in a row, staring with haughty looks at the strangers. "Goodness me, your Majesty!" exclaimed the first. "What queer, dreadful looking creatures are these? Where in all the sky did they come from?" "They say they came from the earth, Cerulia," answered the Boolooroo. "But that is impossible," said another princess. "Our scientists have proved that the earth is not inhabited." "Your scientists'll have to guess again, then," said Trot. "But how did they get to Sky Island?" inquired the third snub-nosed one. "By means of a Magic Umbrella which I have captured and put away in my treasure chamber," replied the Boolooroo. "What will you do with the monsters, Papa?" asked the fourth princess. "I haven't decided yet," said the Boolooroo. "They're curiosities, you see, and may serve to amuse us. But as they're only half civilized, I shall make them my slaves." "What are they good for? Can they do anything useful?" asked the fifth. "We'll see," returned the King impatiently. "I can't decide in a hurry. Give me time, Azure, give me time. If there's anything I hate, it's a hurry." "I've an idea, your Majesty," announced the sixth snub-nosed princess, whose complexion was rather darker than that of her sisters. "And it has come to me quite deliberately, without any hurry at all. Let us take the little girl to be our maid, to wait upon us and amuse us when we're dull. All the other ladies of the court will be wild with envy, and if the child doesn't prove of use to us we can keep her for a living pincushion." "Oh! Ah! That will be fine!" cried all the other five, and the Boolooroo said: "Very well, Indigo. It shall be as you desire." Then he turned to Trot and added: "I present you to the six lovely snub-nosed princesses to be their slave. If you are good and obedient, you won't get your ears boxed oftener than once an hour." "I won't be anybody's slave," protested Trot. "I don't like these snub-nosed, fussy females, and I won't have anything to do with 'em." "How impudent!" cried Cerulia. "How vulgar!" cried Turquoise. "How unladylike!" cried Sapphire. "How silly!" cried Azure. "How absurd!" cried Cobalt. "How wicked!" cried Indigo, and then all six held up their hands as if horrified. The Boolooroo laughed. "You'll know how to bring her to time, I imagine," he remarked. "And if the girl isn't reasonable and obedient, send her to me and I'll have her patched. Now then, take her away." But Trot was obstinate and wouldn't budge a step. "Keep us together, your Majesty," begged Cap'n Bill. "If we're to be slaves, don't separate us, but make us all the same kind of slaves." "I shall do what pleases me," declared the Boolooroo angrily. "Don't try to dictate, old Moonface, for there's only one royal will in Sky Island, and that's my own." He then gave a command to a soldier, who hastened away to the palace and soon returned with a number of long blue ribbons. One he tied around Trot's waist and then attached it to the other six ribbons. Each of the six snub-nosed princesses held the end of a ribbon, and then they turned and marched haughtily away to the palace, dragging the little girl after them. "Don't worry, Trot," called Button-Bright. "We'll get you out of this trouble pretty soon." "Trust to us, mate," added Cap'n Bill. "We'll manage to take care o' you." "Oh, I'm all right," answered Trot with fine courage. "I'm not afraid of these gawkies." But the princesses pulled her after them, and soon they had all disappeared into one of the entrances to the Blue Palace. "Now, then," said the Boolooroo, "I will instruct you two in your future duties. I shall make old Moonface—" "My name's Cap'n Bill Weedles," interrupted the sailor. "I don't care what your name is. I shall call you Old Moonface," replied the King, "for that suits you quite well. I shall appoint you the Royal Nectar Mixer to the Court of Sky Island, and if you don't mix our nectar properly, I'll have you patched." "How do you mix it?" asked Cap'n Bill. "I don't mix it. "It's not the Boolooroo's place to mix nectar," was the stern reply. "But you may inquire of the palace servants, and perhaps the royal chef or the major domo will condescend to tell you. Take him to the servants' quarters, Captain Ultramarine, and give him a suit of the royal livery." So Cap'n Bill was led away by the chief of the soldiers, and when he had gone the King said to Button Bright: "You, slave, shall be the Royal Boot Blue. Your duty will be to keep the boots and shoes of the royal family nicely polished with blue." "I don't know how," answered Button Bright surlily. "You'll soon learn. The Royal Steward will supply you with blue paste, and when you've brushed this on our shoes you must shine them with Q rays of moonshine. Do you understand?" "No," said Button Bright. Then the Boolooroo told one of his soldiers to take the boy to the Shoeblue Den and have him instructed in his duties, and the soldier promptly obeyed and dragged Button Bright away to the end of the palace where the servants lived. End of chapter 6. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Sky Island by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 7. Ghip Ghisizzle Proves Friendly. The royal palace was certainly a magnificent building, with large and lofty rooms and superb furnishings, all being in shades of blue. The soldier and the boy passed through several broad corridors and then came to a big hall where many servants were congregated. These were staring in bewilderment at Cap'n Bill, who had been introduced to them by Captain Ultramarine. Now they turned in no less surprise to examine the boy, and their looks expressed not only astonishment but dislike. The servants were all richly attired in blue silk liveries, and they seemed disposed to resent the fact that these strangers had been added to their ranks. They scowled and muttered and behaved in a very unfriendly way, even after Captain Ultramarine had explained that the newcomers were merely base slaves and not to be classed with the free royal servants of the palace. One of those present, however, showed no special enmity to Button Bright and Cap'n Bill, and this Blueskin attracted the boy's notice because his appearance was so strange. He looked as if he were made of two separate men, each cut through the middle and then joined together, half of one to half of the other. One side of his blue hair was curly and the other half straight. One ear was big and stuck out from the side of his head, while the other ear was small and flat. One eye was half shut and twinkling, while the other was big and staring. His nose was thin on one side and flat on the other, while one side of his mouth curled up and the other down. Button Bright also noticed that he limped as he walked, because one leg was a trifle longer than the other, and that one hand was delicate and slender, and the other thick and hardened by use. "Don't stare at him," a voice whispered in the boy's ear. "The poor fellow has been patched, that's all." Button Bright turned to see who had spoken, and found by his side a tall young Blueskin with a blue gold chain around his neck. He was quite the best looking person the boy had seen in Sky Island, and he spoke in a pleasant way and seemed quite friendly. But the two-sided man had overheard the remark, and he now stepped forward and said in a careless tone: "Never mind. It's no disgrace to be patched in a country ruled by such a cruel Boolooroo as we have. Let the boy look at me if he wants to. I'm not pretty, but that's not my fault. Blame the Boolooroo." "I'm glad to meet you, sir," stammered Button Bright. "What is your name, please?" "I'm now named Jim Fred Jones Jinks, and my partner is called Fred Jim Jinks Jones. He's busy at present guarding the treasure chamber, but I'll introduce you to him when he comes back. We've had the misfortune to be patched, you know." "What is being patched?" asked the boy. "They cut two of us in halves and mismatch the halves, half of one to half of the other, you know, and then the other two halves are patched together. It destroys our individuality and makes us complex creatures, so it's the worst punishment that can be inflicted in Sky Island." "Oh!" said Button Bright, alarmed at such dreadful butchery. Doesn't it hurt?" "No, it doesn't hurt," replied Jim-Fred, "but it makes one frightfully nervous. They stand you under a big knife, which drops and slices you neatly in two, exactly in the middle. Then they match half of you to another person who has likewise been sliced, and there you are, patched to some one you don't care about and haven't much interest in. If your half wants to do something, the other half is likely to want to do something different. And the funny part of it is, you don't quite know which is your half and which is the other half. It's a terrible punishment, and in a country where one can't die or be killed until he has lived his 600 years, to be patched is a great misfortune." "I'm sure it is," said Button Bright earnestly. "But can't you ever get unpatched again?" "If the Boolooroo would consent, I think it could be done," Jim-Fred replied. "But he never will consent. This is about the meanest Boolooroo who ever ruled this land, and he was the first to invent patching people as a punishment. I think we will all be glad when his 300 years of rule are ended." "When will that be?" inquired the boy. "Hush!" cried everyone in a chorus, and they all looked over their shoulders as if frightened by the question. The officer with the blue gold chain pulled Button Bright's sleeve and whispered, "Follow me, please." And then he beckoned to Cap'n Bill and led the two slaves to another room where they were alone. "I must instruct you in your duties," said he, when they were all comfortably seated in cozy chairs with blue cushions. "You must learn how to obey the Boolooroo's commands, so he won't become angry and have you patched." "How could he patch us?" asked the sailor man curiously. "Oh, he'd just slice you all in halves, and then patch half of the boy to half of the girl, and the other half to half of you, and the other half of you to the other half of the girl. See?" "Can't say I do," said Cap'n Bill, much bewildered. "It's a reg'lar mix-up." "That's what it's meant to be," explained the young officer. "And seein' as we're Earth folks and not natives of Sky Island, I've an idea the slicing machine would about end us without bein' patched," continued the sailor. "Oh," said Button Bright, "so it would." "While you are in this country you can't die till you've lived 600 years," declared the officer. "Oh," said Button Bright, "that's different, of course. But who are you, please?" "My name is Ghip Ghisizzle. Can you remember it?" "I can 'member the sizzle," said the boy, "but I'm 'fraid the gwip, grip, glip " "Ghip Ghisizzle," repeated the officer slowly. "I want you to remember my name, because if you are going to live here you are sure to hear of me a great many times. Can you keep a secret?" "I can try," said Button Bright. "I've kept secrets once in a while," asserted Cap'n Bill. "Well, try to keep this one. I'm to be the next Boolooroo of Sky Island." "Good for you!" cried the sailor. "I wish you was the Boolooroo now, sir. But it seems you've got to wait 100 years or more afore you can take his place." Ghip Ghisizzle rose to his feet and paced up and down the room for a time, a frown upon his blue face. Then he halted and faced Cap'n Bill. "Sir," said he, "there lies all my trouble. I'm quite sure the present Boolooroo has reigned 300 years next Thursday, but he claims it is only 200 years, and as he holds the Royal Book of Records under lock and key in the Royal Treasury, there is no way for us to prove he is wrong." "Oh," said Button Bright. "How old is the Boolooroo?" "He was 200 years old when he was elected," replied Ghip Ghisizzle. "If he has already reigned 300 years, as I suspect, then he is now 500 years old. You see, he is trying to steal another 100 years of rule, so as to remain a tyrant all his life." "He don't seem as old as that," observed Cap'n Bill thoughtfully. "Why, I'm only 60 myself, and I guess I look twice as old as your king does." "We do not show our age in looks," the officer answered. "I am just about your own age, sir, 62 my next birthday, but I'm sure I don't look as old as you." "That's a fact," agreed Cap'n Bill. Then he turned to Button Bright and added, "Don't that prove Sky Island is a fairy country, as I said?" "Oh, I've known that all along," said the boy. "The slicing and patching proves it, and so do lots of other things." "Now then," said Ghip Ghisizzle, "let us talk over your duties. It seems you must mix the royal nectar, Cap'n Bill. Do you know how to do that?" "I'm free to say as I don't, Friend Sizzle. The Boolooroo is very particular about his nectar. I think he has given you this job so he can find fault with you and have you punished. But we will fool him. You are strangers here, and I don't want you imposed upon. I'll send Tiggle to the royal pantry and keep him there to mix the nectar. Then when the Boolooroo or the Queen or any of the Snubnosed Princesses call for a drink, you can carry it to them, and it will be sure to suit them." "Thanky, sir," said Cap'n Bill. "That's real kind of you." "Your job, Button Bright, is easier," continued Ghip Ghisizzle. "I'm no boot black," declared the boy. "The Boolooroo has no right to make me do his dirty work." "You're a slave," the officer reminded him, "and a slave must obey." "Why?" asked Button Bright. "Because he can't help himself. No slave ever wants to obey, but he just has to. And it isn't dirty work at all. You don't black the royal boots and shoes; you merely blue them with a finely perfumed blue paste. Then you shine them neatly and your task is done. You will not be humiliated by becoming a boot black. You'll be a boot blue." "Oh," said Button Bright. "I don't see much difference, but perhaps it's a little more respectable." "Yes, the Royal Boot Blue is considered a high official in Sky Island. You do your work at evening or early morning, and the rest of the day you are at liberty to do as you please." "It won't last long, Button Bright," said Cap'n Bill, consolingly. "Somethin's bound to happen pretty soon, you know." "I think so, myself," answered the boy. "And now," remarked Ghip Ghisizzle, "since you understand your new duties, perhaps you'd like to walk out with me and see the Blue City and the glorious blue country of Sky Island." "We would that!" cried Cap'n Bill, promptly. So they accompanied their new friend through a maze of passages, for the palace was very big, and then through a high arched portal into the streets of the city. So rapid had been their descent when the umbrella landed them in the royal garden that they had not even caught a glimpse of the Blue City. So they now gazed with wonder and interest at the splendid sights that met their eyes. End of chapter 7. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Sky Island by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 8. The Blue City. The Blue City was quite extensive and consisted of many broad streets paved with blue marble and lined with splendid buildings of the same beautiful material. There were houses and castles and shops for the merchants, and all were prettily designed and had many slender spires and imposing turrets that rose far into the blue air. Everything was blue here, just as was everything in the royal palace and gardens, and a blue haze overhung all the city. "Doesn't the sun ever shine?" asked Cap'n Bill. "Not in the blue part of Sky Island," replied Ghip Ghisizzle. "The moon shines here every night, but we never see the sun. I am told, however, that on the other side of the island, which I have never seen, the sun shines brightly, but there is no moon at all." "Oh!" said Button Bright. "Is there another half to Sky Island?" "Yes, a dreadful place called the Pink Country. I'm told everything there is pink instead of blue. A fearful place it must be, indeed," said the Blueskin, with a shudder. "I dunno about that," remarked Cap'n Bill. "That Pink Country sounds kinda cheerful to me. Is your Blue Country very big?" "It is immense," was the proud reply. "This enormous city extends a half mile in all directions from the center, and the country outside the city is fully a half mile further in extent. That's very big, isn't it?" "Not very," replied Cap'n Bill with a smile. "We've cities on the earth 10 times bigger, and then some big besides. We'd call this a small town in our country. Our country is thousands of miles wide and thousands of miles long. "It's the great United States of America," added the boy, earnestly. Ghip Ghisizzle seemed astonished. He was silent a moment and then he said: "Here in Sky Island we prize truthfulness very highly. Our Boolaroo is not very truthful, I admit, for he is trying to misrepresent the length of his reign; but our people, as a rule, speak only the truth." "So do we," asserted Cap'n Bill. "What Button Bright said is the honest truth, every word of it." "But we have been led to believe that Sky Island is the greatest country in the universe, meaning, of course, our half of it, the Blue Country." "It may be for you, perhaps," the sailor stated politely, "and I don't imagine any island floatin' in the sky is any bigger. But the universe is a big place, and you can't be sure of what's in it till you've traveled, like we have." "Perhaps you are right," mused the Blueskin, but he still seemed to doubt them. "Is the pink side of Sky Island bigger than the blue side?" asked Button Bright. "No; it is supposed to be the same size," was the reply. "Then why haven't you ever been there? Seems to me you could walk across the whole island in an hour," said the boy. "The two parts are separated by an impassable barrier," answered Ghip Ghisizzle. "Between them lies the Great Fog Bank." "A fog bank? Why, that's no barrier!" exclaimed Cap'n Bill. "It is, indeed," returned the Blueskin. "The fog bank is so thick and heavy that it blinds one, and if once you got into the bank you might wander forever and not find your way out again. Also, it is full of dampness that wets your clothes and your hair until you become miserable. It is furthermore said that those who enter the fog bank forfeit the 600 years allowed them to live, and are liable to die at any time. Here we do not die, you know. We merely pass away." "How's that?" asked the sailor. "Isn't passin' away just the same as dyin'?" "No, indeed. When our 600 years are ended, we march into the Great Blue Grotto, through the Arch of Phinis, and are never seen again." "That's queer," said Button Bright. "What would happen if you didn't march through the arch?" "I do not know, for no one has ever refused to do so. It is the law, and we obey it." "It saves funeral expenses, anyhow," remarked Cap'n Bill. "Where is this arch?" "Just outside the gates of the city. There is a mountain in the center of the Blue Land, and the entrance to the Great Blue Grotto is at the foot of the mountain. According to our figures, the Boolaroo ought to march into this grotto 100 years from next Thursday, but he is trying to steal 100 years, and so perhaps he won't enter the Arch of Phinis. Therefore, if you will please be patient for about 100 years, you will discover what happens to one who breaks the law." "Thankee," remarked Cap'n Bill. "I don't expect to be very curious 100 years from now." "Nor I," added Button Bright, laughing at the whimsical speech. "But I don't see how the Boolaroo is able to fool you all. Can't any of you remember 200 or 300 years back, when he first began to rule?" "No," said Ghip Ghisizzle. "That's a long time to remember, and we Blueskins try to forget all we can, especially whatever is unpleasant. Those who remember are usually the unhappy ones. Only those able to forget find the most joy in life." During this conversation they had been walking along the streets of the Blue City, where many of the Blueskin inhabitants stopped to gaze wonderingly at the sailor and the boy whose strange appearance surprised them. They were a nervous, restless people, and their egg-shaped heads, set on the ends of long, thin necks, seemed so grotesque to the strangers that they could scarcely forbear laughing at them. The bodies of these people were short and round, and their legs exceptionally long, so when a Blueskin walked he covered twice as much ground at one step as Cap'n Bill or Button Bright did. The women seemed just as repellent as the men, and Button Bright began to understand that the 6 snub-nosed princesses were, after all, rather better looking than most of the females of the Blue Country, and so had a certain right to be proud and haughty. There were no horses nor cows in this land, but there were plenty of blue goats, from which the people got their milk. Children tended the goats, wee blue-skinned boys and girls, whose appearance was so comical that Button-Bright laughed whenever he saw one of them. Although the natives had never seen before this any human beings made as Button-Bright and Cap'n Bill were, they took a strong dislike to the strangers and several times threatened to attack them. Perhaps if Ghip Ghisizzle, who was their favorite, had not been present, they would have mobbed our friends with vicious ill will and might have seriously injured them. But Ghip Ghisizzle's friendly protection made them hold aloof. By and by they passed through a city gate, and their guide showed them the outer walls which protected the city from the country beyond. There were several of these gates, and from their recesses stone steps led to the top of the wall. They mounted a flight of these steps, and from their elevation plainly saw the low mountain where the Arch of Phinis was located, and beyond that the thick blue-gray fog bank, which constantly rolled like billows of the ocean and really seemed from a distance quite forbidding. But it wouldn't take long to get there, decided Button-Bright, and if you were close up it might not be worse than any other fog. Is the Pink Country on the other side of it? "So we are told in the Book of Records," replied Ghip Ghisizzle. "None of us now living know anything about it, but the Book of Records calls it the Sunset Country, and says that at evening the pink shades are drowned by terrible colors of orange and crimson and golden yellow and red. Wouldn't it be horrible to be obliged to look upon such a sight? It must give the poor people who live there dreadful headaches." "I'd like to see that Book of Records," mused Cap'n Bill, who didn't think the description of the Sunset Country at all dreadful. "I'd like to see it myself," returned Ghip Ghisizzle, with a sigh. "But no one can lay hands on it because the Boolaroo keeps it safely locked up in his treasure chamber." "Where's the key to the treasure chamber?" asked Button-Bright. "The Boolaroo keeps it in his pocket night and day," was the reply. "He is afraid to let anyone see the book, because it would prove he has already reigned 300 years next Thursday, and then he would have to resign the throne to me and leave the palace and live in a common house." "My Magic Umbrella is in that treasure chamber," said Button-Bright, "and I'm going to try to get it." "Are you?" inquired Ghip Ghisizzle eagerly. "Well, if you manage to enter the treasure chamber, be sure to bring me the Book of Records. If you can do that, I will be the best and most grateful friend you ever had." "I'll see," said the boy. "It ought not to be hard work to break into the treasure chamber. Is it guarded?" "Yes. The outside guard is Jimfred Jinksjones, the double patch of the Fredjim whom you have met, and the inside guard is a ravenous creature known as the Blue Wolf, which has teeth a foot long and as sharp as needles." "Oh," said Button-Bright. "But never mind the Blue Wolf. I must manage to get my umbrella somehow or other." They now walked back to the palace, still objects of much curiosity to the natives, who sneered at them and mocked them, but dared not interfere with their progress. At the palace they found that dinner was about to be served in the big dining hall of the servants and dependents and household officers of the Royal Boolaroo. Ghip Ghisizzle was the major domo and master of ceremonies, so he took his seat at the end of the long table and placed Cap'n Bill on one side of him and Button-Bright on the other, to the great annoyance of the other Blueskins present, who favored the strangers with nothing pleasanter than envious scowls. The Boolaroo and his queen and daughters, the 6 snub-nosed princesses, dined in formal state in the banquet hall, where they were waited upon by favorite soldiers of the royal bodyguard. Here in the servants' hall there was one vacant seat next to Button-Bright, which was reserved for Trot, but the little girl had not yet appeared, and the sailor man and the boy were beginning to be uneasy about her. End of chapter 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Sky Island by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 9. The Tribulation of Trot. The apartments occupied by the 6 snub-nosed princesses were so magnificent that when Trot first entered them, led by her haughty captors, she thought that they must be the most beautiful rooms in all the world. There was a long and broad reception room with 47 windows in it, and opening out of it were 6 lovely bedchambers, each furnished in the greatest luxury. Adjoining each sleeping room was a marble bath, and each princess had a separate boudoir and a dressing room. The furnishings were of the utmost splendor, blue gold and blue gems being profusely used in the decorations, while the divans and chairs were of richly carved blue wood, upholstered in blue satins and silks. The draperies were superbly embroidered, and the rugs upon the marble floors were woven with beautiful scenes in every conceivable shade of blue. When they first reached the reception room, Princess Azure cast herself upon a divan, while her 5 sisters sat or reclined in easy chairs, with their heads thrown back and their blue chins scornfully elevated. Trot, who was much annoyed at the treatment she had received, did not hesitate to seat herself also in a big easy chair. "Slave!" cried Princess Cerulia, "fetch me a mirror." "Slave!" cried Princess Turquoise, "a lock of my hair is loosened. Bind it up." "Slave!" called Princess Cobalt, "unfasten my shoes. They're too tight." "Slave!" cried Princess Sapphire, "bring hither my box of blue chocolates." "Slave!" cried Princess Azure, "stand by my side and fan me." "Slave!" cried Princess Indigo, "get out of that chair. How dare you sit in our presence?" "If you're saying all those things to me," replied Trot, "you may as well save your breath. I'm no slave." And she cuddled down closer in the chair. "You ARE a slave!" shouted the 6, all together. "I'm not." "Our father, the revered and resplendent Royal Ruler of the Blues, has made you our slave," asserted Indigo, with a yawn. "But he can't," objected the little girl. "I'm some royal and rapturous and ridic'lous myself, and I won't allow any cheap Boolaroo to order me 'round." "Are you of royal birth?" asked Azure, seeming surprised. "Royal? Why, I'm an American, Snubnoses, and if there's anything royaler than an American, I'd like to know what it is." The princesses seemed uncertain what reply to make to this speech, and began whispering together. Finally Indigo said to Trot: "We do not think it matters what you were in your own country, for having left there, you have forfeited your rank. By recklessly intruding into our domain, you have become a slave, and being a slave, you must obey us or suffer the consequences." "What's consequences?" asked the girl. "Dare to disobey us and you will quickly find out," snapped Indigo, swaying her head from side to side on its long, swan-like neck, like the pendulum of a clock. "I don't want any trouble," said Trot gravely. "We came to Sky Island by mistake, and wanted to go right away again, but your father wouldn't let us. It isn't our fault we're still here, and I'm free to say you're a very disagreeable and horrid lot of people, with no manners to speak of, or you'd treat us nicely." "No impertinence!" cried Indigo savagely. "Why, it's the truth," replied Trot. Indigo made a rush and caught Trot by both shoulders. The princess was twice the little girl's size, and she shook her victim so violently that Trot's teeth rattled together. Then Princess Cobalt came up and slapped one side of the slave's face, and Princess Turquoise ran forward and slapped the other side. Cerulia gave Trot a push one way, and Sapphire pushed her the other way, so the little girl was quite out of breath and very angry when finally her punishment ceased. She had not been much hurt, though, and she was wise enough to understand that these princesses were all cruel and vindictive, so that her safest plan was to pretend to obey them. "Now then," commanded Princess Indigo, "go and fetch my little blue dog that crows like a rooster." "And feed my pretty blue cat that sings like a bird," said Princess Azure. "And feed my soft blue lamb that chatters like a monkey," said Princess Cobalt. "And feed my poetic blue parrot that barks like a dog," said Princess Sapphire. "And feed my fuzzy blue rabbit that roars like a lion," said Princess Turquoise. "And feed my lovely blue peacock that mews like a cat," said Princess Cerulia. "Anything else?" asked Trot, drawing a long breath. "Not until you have properly fed our pets," replied Azure, with a scowl. "What do they eat, then?" "Meat, milk, clover, seeds, bread, carrots." "All right," said Trot. "Where do you keep the menagerie?" "Our pets are in our boudoirs," said Indigo harshly. "What a little fool you are!" "Perhaps," said Trot, pausing as she was about to leave the room, "when I grow up I'll be as big a fool as any of you." Then she ran away to escape another shaking, and in the first boudoir she found the little blue dog curled up on a blue cushion in a corner. Trot patted his head gently, and this surprised the dog, who was accustomed to cuffs and kicks. So he licked Trot's hand and wagged his funny little tail, and then straightened up and crowed like a rooster. The girl was delighted with the queer doggy, and she found some meat in a cupboard and fed him out of her hand, patting the tiny creature and stroking his soft blue hair. The doggy had never in his life known anyone so kind and gentle, so when Trot went into the next boudoir, the animal followed close at her heels, wagging his tail every minute. The blue cat was asleep on a window seat, but it woke when Trot tenderly took it in her lap and fed it milk from a blue gold dish. It was a pretty cat, and instantly knew the little girl was a friend, vastly different from its own bad-tempered mistress. So it sang beautifully as a bird sings, and both the cat and the dog followed Trot into the third boudoir. Here was a tiny baby lamb with fleece as blue as a larkspur and as soft as silk. "Oh, you darling!" cried Trot, hugging the little lamb tight in her arms. At once the lamb began chattering, just as a monkey chatters, only in the most friendly and grateful way, and Trot fed it a handful of fresh blue clover and smoothed and petted it until the lamb was eager to follow her wherever she might go. When she came to the fourth boudoir, a handsome blue parrot sat on a blue perch and began barking as if it were nearly starved. Then it cried out, "Rub-a-dub-dub, gimme some grub." Trot laughed and gave it some seeds, and while the parrot ate them she stroked gently his soft feathers. The bird seemed much astonished at the unusual caress, and turned upon the girl first one little eye and then the other, as if trying to discover why she was so kind. He had never experienced kind treatment in all his life. So it was no wonder that when the little girl entered the fifth boudoir she was followed by the parrot, the lamb, the cat, and the dog, who all stood beside her and watched her feed the peacock, which she found strutting around and mewing like a cat for his dinner. Said the parrot, "I spy a peacock's eye on every feather. I wonder why." The peacock soon came to love Trot as much as the other birds and all the beasts did, and it spread its tail and strutted after her into the next boudoir, the sixth one. As she entered this room, Trot gave a start of fear, for a terrible roar like the roar of a lion greeted her. But there was no lion there. A fuzzy blue rabbit was making all the noise. "For goodness sake, keep quiet," said Trot. "Here's a nice blue carrot for you. The color seems all wrong, but it may taste just as good as if it was red." Evidently it did taste good, for the rabbit ate it greedily. When it was not roaring, the creature was so soft and fluffy that Trot played with it and fondled it a long time after it had finished eating, and the rabbit played with the cat and the dog and the lamb and did not seem a bit afraid of the parrot or the peacock. But all of a sudden in pounced Princess Indigo with a yell of anger. "So this is how you waste your time, is it?" exclaimed the Princess, and grabbing Trot's arm, she jerked the girl to her feet and began pushing her from the room. All the pets began to follow her, and seeing this, Indigo yelled at them to keep back. As they paid no attention to this command, the Princess seized a basin of water and dashed the fluid over the beasts and birds, after which she renewed her attempt to push Trot from the room. The pets rebelled at such treatment, and believing they ought to protect Trot, whom they knew to be their friend, they proceeded to defend her. The little blue dog dashed at Indigo and bit her right ankle, while the blue cat scratched her left leg with its claws, and the parrot flew upon her shoulder and pecked her ear. The lamb ran up and butted Indigo so that she stumbled forward on her face, when the peacock proceeded to pound her head with his wings. Indigo, screaming with fright, sprang to her feet again, but the rabbit ran between her legs and tripped her up, all the time roaring loudly like a lion, and the dog crowed triumphantly as a rooster crows, while the cat warbled noisily, and the lamb chattered, and the parrot barked, and the peacock screeched "Meow!" Altogether, Indigo was, as Trot said, "scared stiff," and she howled for help until her sisters ran in and rescued her, pulling her through the bedchamber into the reception room. When she was alone, Trot sat down on the floor and laughed until the tears came to her eyes, and she hugged all the pets and kissed them every one and thanked them for protecting her. "That's all right. We like a fight," declared the parrot in reply. The princesses were horrified to find Indigo so scratched and bitten, and they were likewise amazed at the rebellion of their 6 pets, which they had never petted, indeed, but kept in their boudoirs so they could abuse them whenever they felt especially wicked or ill-natured. None of the snub-nosed ones dared enter the room where the girl was, but they called through a crack in the door for Trot to come out instantly. Trot, pretending not to hear, paid no attention to these commands. Finding themselves helpless and balked of their revenge, the 6 snub-nosed princesses finally recovered from their excitement and settled down to a pleasant sisterly quarrel, as was their customary amusement. Indigo wanted to have Trot patched, and Cerulia wanted her beaten with knotted cords, and Cobalt wanted her locked up in a dark room, and Sapphire wanted her fed on sand, and Turquoise wanted her bound to a windmill, and so between these various desires they quarreled and argued until dinner time arrived. Trot was occupying Indigo's room, so that princess was obliged to dress with azure, not daring to enter her own chamber, and the 2 sisters quarreled so enthusiastically that they almost came to blows before they were ready for dinner. Before the 6 snub-nosed princesses went to the royal banquet hall, Cobalt stuck her head through a crack of the door and said to Trot, "If you want any dinner, you'll find it in the servants' hall. I advise you to eat, for after our dinner we will decide upon a fitting punishment for you, and then I'm sure you won't have much appetite." "Thank you," replied the girl. "I'm right hungry just now." She waited until the snub-nosed sextet had pranced haughtily away, and then she came out, followed by all the pets, and found her way to the servants' quarters. End of chapter 9. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Sky Island by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 10. The King's Treasure Chamber. All the Blueskins assembled in the servants' hall were amazed to see the pets of the princesses trailing after the strange little girl, but Trot took her place next to Button-Bright at the table, and the parrot perched upon her shoulder, while the peacock stood upon one side of her chair and the lamb upon the other, and the cat and dog lay at her feet, and the blue rabbit climbed into her lap and cuddled down there. Some of the Blueskins insisted that the animals and birds must be put out of the room, but Ghip Ghisizzle said they could remain, as they were the favored pets of the lovely snub-nosed princesses. Cap'n Bill was delighted to see his dear little friend again, and so was Button-Bright, and now that they were reunited, for a time at least, they paid little heed to the sour looks and taunting remarks of the ugly Blueskins, and ate heartily of the dinner, which was really very good. The meal was no sooner over than Ghip Ghisizzle was summoned to the chamber of His Majesty the Boolaroo, But before he went away he took Trot and Cap'n Bill and Button Bright into a small room and advised them to stay there until he returned, so that the servants and soldiers would not molest them. "My people seem to dislike strangers," said the Majordomo thoughtfully, "and that surprises me because you are the first strangers they had ever seen. I think they imagine you will become favorites of the Boolaroo and of the princesses, and that is why they are jealous and hate you." "They needn't worry about that," replied Trot. "The Snubnoses hate me worse than the people do." "I can't imagine a Boot Blue becoming a royal favorite," grumbled Button Bright. "Or a necktie mixer," added Cap'n Bill. "You don't mix neckties; you're a nectar mixer," said Ghip Ghisizzle, correcting the sailor. "I'll not be gone long, for I'm no favorite of the Boolooroo, either. So please stay quietly in this room until my return." The Majordomo found the Boolooroo in a bad temper. He had finished his dinner, where his 6 daughters had bitterly denounced Trot all through the meal and implored their father to invent some new and terrible punishment for her. Also, his wife, the Queen, had made him angry by begging for gold to buy ribbons with. Then, when he had retired to his own private room, he decided to send for the umbrella he had stolen from Button Bright and test its magic powers. But the umbrella in his hands proved just as common as any other umbrella might. He opened it and closed it and turned it this way and that, commanding it to do all sorts of things. But of course the Magic Umbrella would obey no one but a member of the family that rightfully owned it. At last the Boolooroo threw it down and stamped upon it and then kicked it into a corner, where it rolled underneath a cabinet. Then he sent for Ghip Ghisizzle. "Do you know how to work that Magic Umbrella?" he asked the Majordomo. "No, your Majesty, I do not," was the reply. "Well, find out. Make the Whiteskins tell you, so that I can use it for my own amusement." "I'll do my best, your Majesty," said Ghip Ghisizzle. "You'll do more than that, or I'll have you patched!" roared the angry Boolooroo. "And don't waste any time, either, for as soon as we find out the secret of the umbrella, I'm going to have the 3 strangers march through the Arch of Phinis, and that will be the end of them." "You can't do that, your Majesty," said the Majordomo. "Why can't I?" "They haven't lived 600 years yet, and only those who have lived that length of time are allowed to march through the Arch of Phinis into the Great Blue Grotto." The King looked at him with a sneer. "Has anyone come out of that arch alive?" he asked. "No," said Ghip Ghisizzle, "but no one has ever gone into the Blue Grotto until his allotted time was up." "Well, I'm going to try the experiment," declared the Boolooroo. "I shall march these 3 strangers through the arch, and if by any chance they come out alive, I'll do a new sort of patching. I'll chop off their heads and mix 'em up, putting the wrong head on each of 'em. Ha ha! Won't it be funny to see the old Moonface's head on the little girl? Ho ho! I really hope they'll come out of the Great Blue Grotto alive." "I also hope they will," replied Ghip Ghisizzle. "Then I'll bet you 4 buttonholes they don't. I've a suspicion that once they enter the Great Blue Grotto, that's the last of them." Ghip Ghisizzle went away quite sad and unhappy. He did not approve the way the strangers were being treated, and thought it was wicked and cruel to try to destroy them. During his absence the prisoners had been talking together very earnestly. "We must get away from here somehow or other," said Cap'n Bill, "but of course we can't stir a step without the Magic Umbrel." "No, I must surely manage to get my umbrella first," said Button Bright. "Do it quick, then," urged Trot, "for I can't stand those Snubnoses much longer." "I'll do it tonight," said the boy. "The sooner the better, my lad," remarked the sailor. "But seein' as the Blue Boolooroo has locked it up in his treasure chamber, it mayn't be easy to get hold of." "No, it won't be easy," Button Bright admitted. "But it has to be done, Cap'n Bill, and there's no use waiting any longer. No one here likes us, and in a few days they may make an end of us." "Oh, Button Bright, there's a blue wolf in the treasure chamber!" exclaimed Trot. "Yes, I know." "And a patched man on the guard outside," Cap'n Bill reminded him. "I know," repeated Button Bright. "And the key's in the King's own pocket," added Trot despairingly. The boy nodded. He didn't say how he would overcome all these difficulties, so the little girl feared they would never see the Magic Umbrella again. But their present position was a very serious one, and even Cap'n Bill dared not advise Button Bright to give up the desperate attempt. When Ghip Ghisizzle returned, he said: "You must be very careful not to anger the Boolooroo, or he may do you a mischief. I think the little girl had better keep away from the princesses for tonight, unless they demand her presence. The boy must go for the king's shoes and blue them and polish them, and then take them back to the royal bedchamber. Cap'n Bill won't have anything to do, for I've ordered Tiggle to mix the nectar." "Thank ye, friend Sizzle," said Cap'n Bill. "Now follow me and I will take you to your rooms." He led them to the rear of the palace, where he gave them 3 small rooms on the ground floor, each having a bed in it. Cap'n Bill's room had a small door leading out into the street of the city, but Ghip Ghisizzle advised him to keep this door locked, as the city people would be sure to hurt the strangers if they had the chance to attack them. "You're safer in the palace than anywhere else," said the Majordomo, "for there is no way you can escape from the island, and here the servants and soldiers dare not injure you for fear of the Boolooroo." He placed Trot and her 6 pets, which followed her wherever she went, in one room, and Cap'n Bill in another, and took Button Bright away with him to show the boy the way to the king's bedchamber. As they proceeded, they passed many rooms with closed doors, and before one of these a patched Blueskin was pacing up and down in a tired and sleepy way. It was Jimfred Jinks Jones, the double of the Fred Jim Jones Jinks they had talked with in the servants' hall, and he bowed low before the Majordomo. "This is the King's new Boot Blue, a stranger who has lately arrived here," said Ghip Ghisizzle, introducing the boy to the patched man. "I'm sorry for him," muttered Jimfred. "He's a queer looking chap with his pale yellow skin, and I imagine our cruel Boolooroo is likely to patch him before long, as he did me I mean us." "No, he won't," said Button Bright positively. "The Booloroo's afraid of me." "Oh, that's different," said Jimfred. "You're the first person I ever knew that could scare our Boolooroo." They passed on, and Ghip Ghisizzle whispered, "That is the Royal Treasure Chamber." Button Bright nodded. He had marked the place well so he couldn't miss it when he wanted to find it again. When they came to the king's apartments, there was another guard before the door, this time a long-necked soldier with a terrible scowl. "This slave is the Royal Boot Blue," said Ghip Ghisizzle to the guard. "You will allow him to pass into his Majesty's chamber to get the royal shoes and to return them when they are blued." "All right," answered the guard. "Our Boolooroo is in an ugly mood tonight. It will go hard with this little short-necked creature if he doesn't polish the shoes properly." Then Ghip Ghisizzle left Button Bright and went away, and the boy passed through several rooms to the royal bedchamber, where his Majesty sat undressing. "Hi there! What are you doing here?" he roared as he saw Button Bright. "I've come for the shoes," said the boy. The king threw them at his head, aiming carefully, but Button Bright dodged the missiles, and one smashed a mirror while the other shattered a vase on a small table. His Majesty looked around for something else to throw, but the boy seized the shoes and ran away, returning to his own room. While he polished the shoes he told his plans to Cap'n Bill and Trot, and asked them to be ready to fly with him as soon as he returned with the Magic Umbrella. All they need do was to step out into the street through the door of Cap'n Bill's room and open the umbrella. Fortunately, the seats and the lunch basket were still attached to the handle, or so they thought, and there would be nothing to prevent their quickly starting on the journey home. They waited a long time, however, to give the Boolooroo time to get to sleep, so it was after midnight when Button Bright finally took the shoes in his hand and started for the royal bedchamber. He passed the guard of the royal treasury, and Fred Jim nodded good-naturedly to the boy. But the sleepy guard before the king's apartments was cross and surly. "What are you doing here at this hour?" he demanded. "I'm returning his Majesty's shoes," said Button Bright. "Go back and wait till morning," commanded the guard. "If you prevent me from obeying the Boolooroo's orders," returned the boy quietly, He will probably have you patched." This threat frightened the long necked guard, who did not know what orders the Boolooroo had given his Royal Bootblue. "Go in, then," said he. "But if you make a noise and waken his Majesty, the chances are you'll get yourself patched." "I'll be quiet," promised the boy. Indeed, Button Bright had no desire to waken the Boolooroo, whom he found snoring lustily with the curtains of his high posted bed drawn tightly around him. The boy had taken off his own shoes after he passed the guard, and now he tiptoed carefully into the room, set down the royal shoes very gently, and then crept to the chair where his Majesty's clothes were piled. Scarcely daring to breathe for fear of awakening the terrible monarch, the boy searched in the royal pockets until he found a blue gold key attached to a blue gold chain. At once he decided this must be the key to the treasure chamber. But in order to make sure he searched in every other pocket without finding another key. Then Button Bright crept softly out of the room again, and in one of the outer rooms he sat down near a big cabinet and put on his shoes. Poor Button Bright did not know that lying disregarded beneath that very cabinet at his side was the precious umbrella he was seeking, or that he was undertaking a desperate adventure all for nothing. He passed the long necked guard again, finding the man half asleep, and then made his way to the treasure chamber. Facing Jimfred, he said to the patched man in a serious tone: "His Majesty commands you to go at once to the corridor leading to the apartments of the 6 Snubnosed Princesses and to guard the entrance until morning. You are to permit no one to enter or leave the apartments." "But good gracious!" exclaimed the surprised Jimfred. "Who will guard the treasure chamber?" "I am to take your place," said Button Bright. "Oh, very well," replied Jimfred. "This is a queer freak for our Boolooroo to indulge in, but he is always doing something absurd. You're not much of a guard, seems to me, but if anyone tries to rob the treasure chamber you must ring this big gong, which will alarm the whole palace and bring the soldiers to your assistance. Do you understand?" "Yes," said Button Bright. Then Fred Jim stalked away to the other side of the palace to guard the princesses, and Button Bright was left alone with the key to the treasure chamber in his hand. But he had not forgotten that the ferocious Blue Wolf was guarding the interior of the chamber, so he searched in some of the rooms until he found a sofa pillow, which he put under his arm and then returned to the corridor. He placed the key in the lock, and the bolt turned with a sharp click. Button Bright did not hesitate. He was afraid, to be sure, and his heart was beating fast with the excitement of the moment, but he knew he must regain the Magic Umbrella if he would save his comrades and himself from destruction, for without it they could never return to the earth. So he summoned up his best courage, opened the door, stepped quickly inside, and closed the door after him. End of chapter 10.